This is the Get Global Young Professionals Talk Global Health podcast, envisioned and created by the Irish Global Health Network and their student outreach team. I am your host, Megan Davis, Communications and Events Intern at the Irish Global Health Network and second-year medical student at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. In this series, join me and my student outreach team co-host Aidan Desjardins, a microbiology student at Trinity College, as we talk to inspiring young professionals leading the charge in their respective fields, often operating in sidelines to their career, following their passions above all.
Today we are speaking with Shuranjeet Singh. Shuranjeet is a current DPhil student at Oxford University and also the founder and director of Taraki, a movement working with Punjabi communities to reshape approaches to mental health, which focuses on improving mental awareness, education, social support, and research.
As I've studied more and more, I can tell you that I certainly don't know more and more. And I'm becoming more comfortable with not knowing and increasingly comfortable with learning from the people around me.
Welcome to the podcast, Shuranjeet.
Hi, Aidan. Thank you for having me today.
We understand that you are currently pursuing a Doctor of Philosophy at the University of Oxford. Could you tell us a bit about your research?
Sure thing. So I've just started my DPhil at Oxford University, and my research is exploring how power manifests in processes of youth user participation in mental health research. And as a bit of a background to that, we see within mental health research and even health and social care research more broadly, that there is a real push to get people and communities involved who historically have been those who have been researched. So they haven't actually been involved in kind of research or knowledge-making processes themselves. And so there's this real push, especially within mental health, to center service users, patients, experts by experience, people with lived experiences and mental health challenges, and ensure that their voices and their participation and their involvement is central within the research process more broadly. And because this is something that is in many areas fairly new, it's something that needs a bit more exploration, because that relationship isn't neutral. And it's something where people's existing relationships, their existing power, their existing social positions can impact how that involvement takes place. And so I'm just looking and trying to understand a bit more about the mechanisms of involvement and their underlying features within young people and their participation and involvement in mental health research.
How exactly are you planning to involve the participants in the research?
So there are a couple of things that I'm hoping to do. Because my research is about research, it's kind of focusing on methodologies. I am hoping to have a few ways of getting people involved across that process. The first is having a peer advisory board in parallel to my supervisory board. And this peer advisory board is going to be made up of 3 experts, 2 of them being young people with lived experiences and mental health challenges who have an interest in research, and 1 of them being an expert in the youth mental health field. As this research kind of is developed, and as we actually go and do this research, they'll be consulted and discussed and involved in shaping and directing that. One other way I'm hoping to involve a young person with lived experiences and mental health challenges is as a peer co-researcher. And this would be a really fantastic way not only to enhance someone's opportunities within the research space, but also actually get their voices and their perspectives into the work that's being produced. And finally, it's also a great opportunity for someone to have training and development opportunities that they might not be able to have access to otherwise. And finally, one of the things I'm trying to think about is how do we ensure that the research and its findings continue after the study has taken place? Thinking about dissemination and implementation from the start. And for that, I'm hoping to partner with a peer-led organization to really start thinking about implementation from as early as possible, rather than it just being an afterthought. So, it's great because we can be so imaginative with how people are involved. And it's just unfortunate that it's taken up to this point for this type of work to be more widely accepted.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. You're also involved in founding a non-for-profit, Taraki, that focuses on mental health support from Punjabi communities. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure thing. And for me, Taraki is such a core part of how I've ended up in this mental health space, because I didn't always have this interest at this level. My academic background isn't in natural sciences. It's nothing to do with biology, chemistry, physics. I'm a political scientist and a social scientist by background, but it was after my experiences of mental health challenges when I was transitioning from home to university that I realized and recognized how lucky I was to have support at that time. And I also recognized how so many people in the communities I was growing up in were experiencing similar challenges but didn't have access to support. And so I recognized that there were gaps in our mental health system. There were gaps in how people could access adequate care and support themselves and their communities. And so I recognized that we really can make a difference by starting some work focused specifically on Punjabi communities, working with these communities to reshape approaches to mental health. And that led to the founding of Taraki in October 2017. Taraki is a word found in Punjabi. It's also found in Hindi and Urdu, and it means to progress. And we focus on 4 areas: mental health awareness, education, social support, and research. And together, we're just hoping to really revolutionize how our communities conceptualize mental health and support themselves as well as those around them.
What were the specific challenges experienced by Punjabi communities that you think are unique to them?
So there are different types of dimensions when we think about challenges. And it's really interesting because for a lot of the time, the conversations have been around stigma. They've been around lack of accessing services. And it's just very peculiar when you start thinking about how that attributes blame within these situations. And so at the beginning, when I started this work, I used to say there's a lot of stigma in our communities, people don't access services. And I realized that was very much pointing blame to the communities themselves. And we see this type of logic perpetuated in different spaces where people say that communities are hard to reach, whatever that means. When in reality, it's that our existing understandings of engagement just aren't adequate enough to actually speak the language or engage with those beyond a certain scope. And so for me, there is undoubtedly kind of shame and stigma and challenges around talking about mental health within Punjabi communities. And these are down to a range of different factors, whether it's influenced by gender, perceptions of sociological and historical perceptions, which are really interesting in Punjabi communities. But there's also difficulties when it comes to accessing services, and people's experiences when they access services may actually cause them further harm. It may actually put them off from accessing services again in the future. And there can be a lack of trust. And it's important that we can think about these obstacles, not just at a community level, but at a systemic level, at a structural level as well. Because only then do we understand the breadth of these challenges. And only by naming these challenges can we take steps towards resolving them.
So you mentioned services there. What kind of services are you talking about with engaging with these communities?
So when we're talking about services, we can take something like CBT as an example, or IAPT, increasing access to psychological therapies, which is something that was particularly popular in England anyway. And the common comment or observation that we have from folks is we might be in a very diverse area, but those coming in and accessing CBT aren't representing the diversity of that space. And sometimes people feel, these communities don't access CBT because they don't think therapy is important, or they don't think this is for them. And what you find very, very quickly is that oftentimes these communities haven't even been involved in the conversation about building the knowledge around talking therapies, building the trust to access these services, and then being supported whilst they're in that system as well. And for me, one of the most important factors here is something around language. If we are working with communities who speak a number of different languages other than English, we need to be so much extra kind of conscious and careful that we are working with them to develop their understanding and develop their comfort and trust with the services that we're offering. Because it's naive to say that just because we develop a service in a space that people are going to access it. There is so much more that needs to be done around that. And so, I think the CBT is a good example, because people often say, we're based in an area with high diversity, but we don't get a lot of diverse kind of ethnic and racial groups coming through and accessing services. It's because there's a tapestry of things that need to be considered.
Thank you. We're just wondering what types of projects that are ongoing with this organization.
So I can give you a bit of an update on a few of the projects that are really kind of pushing forward at the moment. The first is something that has been running for almost 2 to 2.5 years. And these are monthly discussion spaces for Punjabi men. We have monthly discussion spaces for Punjabi women. And we also have monthly discussion spaces for Punjabi LGBTQ plus folks as well. And for us, these are open spaces where folks can learn and discuss and grow and build community and connection about topics that they might not normally talk about within their context of family and friends. So these have been running in person before the pandemic, and they have been running virtually during the pandemic, but they're a real important staple of how we engage with our communities. And these are places where we can learn that there are different possibilities for supporting ourselves and supporting each other. We've been enhanced by doing kind of more student focused work. We have spaces that are for students, a space specifically for Punjabi LGBTQ plus students as well. We hold student workshops because we know that students around the world have been impacted adversely through the last 18 months, and it's important to have that support there and ready. Another kind of strand of work that we have going on at the moment is around mental health and faith. So we've been working with 2 faith-based organizations over the last year to develop spaces and kind of workshops that combine psychological insight with faith-based insights, and package it around particular topics that are of importance to faith-based communities, to really try and have those conversations, bringing together these different kinds of knowledge. And just a really interesting insight from that faith-based work is we've been evaluating and monitoring it as we've been going along. And it's really interesting to see, around 60 to 65% of people have identified as experiencing mental health challenges during the pandemic. But 75% of people who experience those challenges said that they have not accessed support for that. And it's just really interesting to note that they're in this space around mental health and faith. So it's not like they don't want to access support. So it's a very, very unique space, and it's something that I'm particularly interested in exploring more. And finally, we have our research work. And our research work really tries to ask some of the most pressing questions when it comes to Punjabi communities and mental health. We do program evaluations, we do reports, and our research work, in my opinion, is something that really puts us in a unique position, because we're not only community advocates and implementation focused, but we're also focused on research, which is often seen to be the the role of researchers and academics. So it's nice to see a grassroots organization getting in there as well.
You mentioned grassroots there. A lot of your work focuses on grassroots efforts. What do you think the role of grassroots efforts is within the realm of global health? And how do you think we as young professionals could incorporate it into our work?
For me, as I've studied more and more, I can tell you that I certainly don't know more and more. And I'm becoming more comfortable with not knowing and increasingly comfortable with learning from the people around me. And when it comes to grassroots work, it's been absolutely phenomenal learning from grassroots practitioners, advocates, activists who take such a unique approach to their work, where it's values-led, compassion, care, humility, and fundamentally, love at the center of what a lot of folks are doing. And it's really sad to see how in some spaces, professional or kind of corporate ways of working are projected onto grassroots contexts. And it's been such a fantastic learning curve looking at it the other way and thinking about how my practice, even beyond grassroots contexts, can be informed by the values and the ways of working that I've learned in that space. And for me, two things that jump out to me massively. The first is it's okay not to know. And the second is it's okay to try, and you might not succeed, but it's important to really take learnings from that and try again. And sometimes we don't give ourselves that space within a professional context. Sometimes we don't forgive ourselves because we're all constantly learning. Sometimes we think we need to get it right first time. We need to, hit the nail on the head straight away. When in fact, sometimes we kind of need to have a few more lessons in between starting something and getting it perfectly right. And I think that type of patience, that type of reflection, and that way of working was really instilled from my grassroots work. And I'm forever grateful for that, forever grateful.
That is really excellent advice that I think we all should take to heart. We were wondering where we can read more about the research you've been mentioning and how we can access the reports to become more informed in these issues.
Sure thing. So if you go onto our Taraki website, which is www.taraki.co.uk, that's taraki.co.uk, and there's a projects tab, and then there'll be a research tab underneath that as well. And we have a page of different kinds of research projects that we've been involved in, whether that's COVID-19 mental health research that we did, whether they're program evaluations, mental health and faith insight reports. There's a whole host of stuff there, and I'm sure that everyone will find something of interest there. And if anyone ever has any questions, we are but an email away. And we're always here to learn, always here to grow, and always here to share the many experiences that we've been so lucky to have.
So if you had one last piece of info or advice you'd like to share about, mental health or working in mental health, what would you think that would be?
For me, it's about doing your research before attempting to make claims and work in contexts that you might be less familiar with. It's about doing research and connecting with those in that space before we enter into that space ourselves, because there is so much work that's already happening. There are so many amazing people, amazing organizations pushing forward in the mental health space. It's integral that we use the wealth of information that we have at our hands to be able to connect with organizations, with people, think about how we can add to what's going on already, rather than planting a whole new garden next door. Think about how we can bring these conversations together, because ultimately we're all looking to uplift the lives of those we serve. And that will only be done with collaboration, with communication, and with being conscientious in how we engage with each other.
Thank you so much for coming on our podcast today, Shuranjeet. And if you would like to learn more about the Irish Global Health Network or the Student Outreach Team, visit www.globalhealth.ie, where you can sign up for our newsletters. Thanks again for tuning in.